first speaker of the couplet is going to be Christine Abernathy from Facebook. So let's have a big warm welcome for Christine.
So first, I just want to give a quick round of applause to Github and the team for just kind of putting an awesome conference together. And congratulations to all of you who made it through Friday afternoon. I'm really excited to be here. I'm just going to be talking about how Facebook does open source at scale. And this is something that I'm part of the open source team at Facebook. And our responsibility is just to make sure that the projects and the programs that relate to Facebook open source are running well. And that includes a lot of different things. And I'm going to share about what we're doing, some of the challenges we've faced, and whether or not you're running actually a big open source program or just getting started, some of these may apply to you as well. So just to kind of get a quick story, our open source roots go back. In 2004, a young undergraduate at Harvard put a website together using Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And that's kind of where we got started. And ever since then, open source has been a big part of Facebook. In fact, as we've grown and we've scaled, we found that we can actually contribute a lot more back to open source. So that's why it's one of the things that's important to us. And there's a common pattern to how we use open source at Facebook. So for example, when we take MySQL, we'll go ahead and use it. Usually when you're doing things at Facebook, you're doing things at scale, so you need to improve it, tweak it. And then once again, you may actually go ahead and improve it and contribute back to the community. There are other programs such as Hack or PHP that came out of using PHP, finding that we needed a lot more horsepower, going ahead and actually replacing with a runtime HHVM, which was discussed earlier by Michael, and then replacing it or giving it back to the community. Open Compute is another sort of example of it. And Open Compute is where we open source some of our hardware designs and then also contribute that back to the community. In some cases, some of these contributions have significantly shifted the way the industry looks at certain things. And one thing I want to mention is that everything at Facebook is 100% used in production. So these are not vanity projects that a summer intern comes and before they leave, they're going to ship it over the wall and leave it. Everything we use is being used on our infrastructure. So everyone who's running HHVM, so Baidu and Wikipedia, they're running the same web server that we're running internally. And there's some challenges that come along with that. Because everything that we use is used in production, things kind of hang along pretty well. So this is kind of a snapshot of what we have. We've got Open Compute, we've got hardware designs, we've got design tools, we've got web infrastructure, data infrastructure, typed languages. You saw some examples of that at Michael's talk earlier today, and IDEs. So there's a lot of things that we are open sourcing at Facebook. And sometimes it looks like we're open sourcing just about everything we have, but basically we're open sourcing anything that's used in production, and we're very careful about that. And this is just like a snapshot of all sort of the highlights of what we've open sourced just in the first half of this year alone. It's not everything. So back in 2013, we actually rebooted the Facebook open source programs at Facebook, because prior to that, what would happen was it had a lot of projects that were languishing out there and they were not used. So to give you a quick sense, in 2012, before the program's reboot, we had 14 projects that were launched. In 2013, that's the reboot year, we had 30 projects that were launched. Last year, 2014, we had 107 projects that were launched by Facebook. And so far, in the first half of this year, we've already launched 53 projects. So it's looking like another banner year. And again, we're very careful about everything that we open source. We want to make sure that it's used in production. So just to give you a quick sense of numbers, these are some of the projects that we have across our portfolio. We have 266 repos, very popular. We also manage how many people are forking. So for those of you, do you know what the background picture there is? Yeah, that's from last time. It was so awesome. I just had to find somewhere to put it on the slide. So to keep in mind that open source is not just an important part of our technology stack, it's actually a good indication of hacker culture. So this is how engineering perceive Facebook. So in fact, every 6 months or so, we do a survey of new hires at Facebook. We found that in this most recent survey, 70% of the people who were new, they knew about Facebook open source before they joined. 64% of those, so that's roughly just under a half, said that the fact that Facebook did open source influenced positively their decision to join. And then just about a third of that said that what they were working on at Facebook was useful because of what they had learned before at open source. So they could come in, get ramped up really quickly. That's really a huge win. So this is why we do open source at Facebook. So let me kind of switch gears and talk about a how and then some of the challenges that we have faced. So when we're releasing our projects at Facebook, there's some challenges that we face, and I just split it up into 3 phases. We've got pre-launch, launch, and then what happens after launch. I'll go through these step by step. So the pre-launch phase, this is the place where you want to get ready, you want to make sure that you're open sourcing for the right reasons, and then what are the steps that you go through to actually make this happen successfully. So I'm just going to highlight some of the challenges that we have. So one of the challenges is, how do you make your code modular? So a lot of projects may previously exist within Facebook, and you need to take the code, modularize it, remove a lot of Facebook dependencies before you're shipping it out. You're also taking a look at some of the APIs and making sure that they are really clean. And see, these are some of the things that might take a long time, but you're making your code ready for the world. And this can take a long time. It's not part of what we actually, as the open source team, need to look at, but it's something that developers need to be aware of. The next challenge is whether or not you are hosting your code internally or externally. So a lot of our projects live on GitHub, but that does not mean that GitHub is actually the source of truth of that project. And there are various reasons why, and we'll walk into that, but that actually plays into some of the challenges that we face. Another part of when we're open sourcing projects is before a project gets green-lighted for launch, it has to go through a review process, and we kind of shepherd that through, and there's some things that we need to be thinking about during that phase. And lastly, a lot of projects, especially if they're big, they need to have sort of marketing material around them, do a big splash. So there are some things that go along with the launch that we also need to think about and take care pre-launch. So I'm just going to start talking about sort of the internal thing. How do you get your code synced internally and externally? So Facebook has a lot of internal tools that help them out with when code drops. It can do a lot of tests like performance measurements, checking things out that run directly. If it's an iOS app, it can run code in the background that shows whether or not something broke. And some of those tools are only available if things are happening internally. So if your source of code of the truth is internally, then you get a lot of those wins. On the flip side, if you're developing on GitHub, then you're sort of developing on the open. Everybody can see what's going on. And that's kind of like the way that we want to encourage people to develop when they're developing, make GitHub the source of truth. But that does not always work for all the projects. So what's happened in the past is a lot of projects, when they have code internally that they want to ship to GitHub, they'll write all these really complicated custom scripts. When a commit lands internally, do this. Or when everything checks out, then push it out. And it becomes a lot of work that they rework over and over again. So we at the open source team are trying to build tooling and practices that can help them out with these flows. And that's some of the things that we do. For example, again, we have this internal GitHub script that can kind of watch changes in a particular directory internally and then get ready for it to ship out. And some of the key features that it has is proper GitHub attribution. If you don't do things right, code can come from GitHub into this internal repo, and code can also come internally into this, and then you want to push that out. If you don't do things right, you can kind of squash the attribution, and the person who worked so hard to actually make the external complete, it gets lost. So some of the things that we actually take care of. We also want to make sure that we are scrubbing all the commit messages, so what gets sent out is sanitized in a way. And then the other thing that it also does is we do continuous imports, because otherwise somebody would have to actually, every time a commit comes in, run these build scripts. So those are some of the things that we put together. And one of our big projects, HHVM, is actually using this, and they're testing this out. And if all works well, we're going to customize this and then make it available to all of our open source projects. The other part that we're also working on is what happens when you want to greenlight a project and send it out for review. So in the past, it kind of gets a little tricky because all these emails come in. I want to open source something. OK, tell us a little bit about it. Yes, you can do it. No, you can't. Could you give me more information? And it becomes a long email thread which gets lost, and then somebody jumps in, and it's chaos. So we just built tooling around that to just ask all the questions in a nicely formatted way and send off something which we call a task. So at Facebook, a lot of things are tasks. Help desk, you file a task. Developer developing something, you file a task. It's a really nice system that we use to communicate. So that's the output of that. So that's how we get our project review started. Everybody who needs to be in the loop gets to subscribe to those tasks. And in addition to that, as we lead up to the launch, we'll use other mechanisms to disseminate information, such as using Facebook groups, or we also use Facebook chat group. Everybody who's concerned about just gets on a chat and gets that going. Now, the other thing that we worry about is if you're a big project, you probably don't want just a README out there. You might have a big website which shows all these nice things. So we've been working with some teams. Some engineers don't want or don't care about writing HTML. All they want to do is ship code. So for those folks, what we do is we've started providing services. So we give them templates, something that can use, say, GitHub pages. They write code in Markdown. And we give them templates around that, and then we make sure it's responsive so it looks good on mobile, and we ship it out. And we're starting to kind of get those going and then listen to feedback, because a lot of different people want different customizations. So whether they want a logo or all these different things, we've covered it. So these are some of the things that we do. And we just want to standardize on a lot of things, so when people want to go from beginning of the project to launch, they have everything they need. So now it's time for launch. This is usually the easy part. This is the part where you just push a button. The only things that can slip you up is not everybody knows what day it's launching, what time it's launching, or what they're supposed to do. But generally, this is the easy part. And all we do is everybody who's concerned about it gets on a Facebook group, and we have up-to-the-minute coordination. In fact, at the recent F8 conference, where over a 2-day period we launched about 6 open source projects, we just had a war room, and everybody was just like clicking buttons and, okay, is this group ready? Go, go, go. And that's what we found works really well. So once you've actually launched the product, you just don't breathe a sigh of relief. So that's where post-launch, this is actually the trickiest part. This is now you're out and going. And some of the things that you need to think about, if you listen to the last talk by Lee, I mean, do you speak Aikido? So that was actually a pretty good talk, because a lot of times some of the challenges initially is you've just launched, and now you got a slew of requests, pull requests. Why did you do this? What are you thinking? I found an error in the docs. So you don't just launch and sort of leave it there. So a lot of things teams just need to know, especially if it's a popular project or we think it's going to be, that you need to be ready for kind of a slew of requests to come in. So we just advise the teams be ready, and we give them best practices of what they should do. And for example, about a week and a half ago, Infer launched a static analyzer for iOS and Android. The team was based out of Android. We launched it on US time. They had been up really late getting it ready, but they basically had to stay probably another 12 hours because of the requests coming in. And a lot of them, we were just coaching them, like, be respectful of the community, just do things the right way, answer the questions, don't be quiet. So past the initial launch, there's sort of another phase. This is actually one of the key elements, is how do you sustain the support? How do you keep the community engaged? What are the different things that you can do, whether it's meetups, blogs, developer forums? What are the different ways that you can keep the community happy? And in addition to that, because we're hosting things at GitHub, when you're reviewing or external requests are coming in, you want to make sure that that's not breaking your code. And we want to make sure that everything is working fine. So that's something that we also need to keep an eye on. And lastly, sometimes it's time to say goodbye to a product. There might be different reasons why that might happen, but you also want to be aware of how do you deal with those. How do you get in front of the situation so that if something needs to be sunsetted, you know what it's about. So I'll start first with just talking about how we handle post-support. And this is where we provide a lot of tooling for our teams internally. So in here, you can see this is like our intranet, where we have a lot of the different tools. This is a dashboard which shows a high-level aggregate of all of the metrics. So here you're seeing things such as how many repos are out there, how many watches, how many commits, and teams can look at this and find a way of seeing how are they doing. You can also drill and get metadata about accounts, and you can actually drill into more details about each account. So for example, we have another place where we actually show all of the projects, and in there you can drill and see and filter by name, by watches, by issues, and get an aggregate view. And then each project can drill, because each project can drill down and get their own page, which has extra information. This could be a place where they have settings for the different tools that we provide for them. But here they also get a place where they can see some of the graphs of things that we pull. So what we actually do to get a lot of this data in is we suck up a lot of data from GitHub. As it turns out, Facebook has a lot of good databases, a lot of good space, so it's easy for us to suck in all the pull requests, the commits, the watches, and we store it internally, and that allows us to show all these nice graphs. And on top of that, a lot of things that we do in terms of showing these graphs, it's sort of a way to gamify so that people can actually come in and see how they're doing and just have more an incentive of look after their projects. And so here, this is a React example showing how many commits are internal versus how many commits are external. In addition to that, another thing that we like to do and provide in terms of tooling is to show appreciation to the people who are passionate and contributing to open source. So here you see another tool that we created showing who are the heroes, who are the top contributors. So we like to do that externally because some of the teams may want to come and send at the end of the year swag to all of the people who have been the top contributors. Internally, we also like to use this data to say thanks to a lot of the internal contributors because some of those are just passionate about open source, but it's not their regular day job. So we want to appreciate them so that they get recognition because some of those are some of our most key contributors. So we provide dashboards for that as well. In addition to that, we also provide tooling for our engineers who are used to some of the workflow and the processes that are there internally to Facebook. So Facebook has a couple of nice tools. One's called Fabricator that's used for reviews. This is a way to review your as your things are going through. And then there's another one that I mentioned previously called Tasks. So here you see a dashboard for Flow showing all from GitHub all of the recent pull requests. And teams can optionally turn on a flag which can pull issues from GitHub and make them into internal tasks they can work in internally. In addition to that, we also allow them to import issues that come to GitHub internally for a way for them to review it. And in scenarios where GitHub is not the source of truth, they can actually pull the code in and use our internal tooling system to run tests so that they can make sure that nothing is breaking internally. The other thing that some of our tools, some of our teams are using just to make GitHub a lot more like Fabricator in terms of the workflow of going through tools is just a way to kind of add labels and add tags on GitHub. So some teams are using this pretty creatively. So you see here an example of a pull request with a label that says that it was reviewed and received. And what we do around that, how this got to the stage, is we pulled in some information. We created internally a tool inside of Facebook which people can go in and see all of the things that they're working in, including the things that come from GitHub. And once somebody has gone and say that they need to attend to something, they can then go to GitHub, look at the issue. If it looks good, they can go ahead and change the label to GitHub accepted. Another thing that we do for teams is we provide each team on code.facebook.com/projects their own space where they can host information. Inside of our tooling, they can go and set settings for where are all the places that they have presence, whether it's Twitter, Google Groups, and then internally we can source that information and make it available in kind of like an RSS feed. So this is an alternative way that they can get promotions. And finally, I just want to touch upon a part where it might be time to say goodbye to a project. So how do you do that? So each project has a setting for who are the owners of the projects, and then we use that information. Every 6 months, we're starting to send out a comprehensive report to find out how are you using the project, are you still the owner, what are some of the pain points that we're seeing, and we're going to use that to inform our next decisions of what we want to work on. In addition to that, we also have a weekly script that tags who are the projects that don't have an owners, and then we use that to follow up with the managers. For example, people could leave, people could move on. There are different ways that we want. So these are sort of reactive. We're also trying to be a little bit proactive, where we actually run scripts to see how many issues have not been looked at for a certain period of time, flag those projects and reach out to them and work with them, and or say, are you having trouble? What can we do together to solve this? So I'm just going to go through some of the best practices that we have and some of the things that we've learned. The first thing is to over-communicate, especially during the launch. As you're running up to the launch, make sure that everybody's on the same page. We typically deal with a lot of different cross-function teams, so we need to be aware of that. Next, if you can, advocate GitHub as the source of truth. There are various scenarios where it may not make sense, but if you can do that, it makes the conversations a lot more open with the community. Set proper post-launch expectations with teams. Know that they need to support the community. Don't just throw something over the wall and walk away. Community needs to be engaged. They need to know that you care about that. And you want to make sure that you ensure the projects are actually being actively maintained. And then finally, show appreciation to the contributors whichever way you can. And we do a lot of these things through tooling. So I want to kind of get a step back and talk about, when we go to a lot of these conferences, we found out that there was a lot of folks who were actually facing similar scenarios. So in September of 2014, we formed a ToDo Group, and this stands for Talk Openly, Develop Openly. It brings together companies that have kind of similar challenges. What we do is some of the partners in there are GitHub, Microsoft, Google, who are speaking at this conference, including many others. And we want to learn from our collective experiences. What are the different best practices? How do we grow at scale? And we're making good conversations, and we want to share these experiences with the other people in the community. And eventually, maybe even actually have some tooling that we can share also with the community around some of the things that we face. So at Facebook, we like to say that work is only 1% done. And we hope that by you seeing a glimpse of how we do open source at Facebook, that you can take away some of the best practices that can help you scale up your open source initiatives. So with that, I'd like to say thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.